David Fowley, we are here to talk about a movie that I don't think anybody talks about, but people should talk about. And we're going to talk about The Mosquito Coast, directed by Peter Weir from 1986. You and I got a very kind of rare and special chance to see this on the big screen, actually, at the Siskel Center in Chicago. They're doing a film series called Daddy Issues. And this was one of the movies that was part of that showcase. So we went and we watched it, and we're going to discuss it tonight. Um, I was This is one of those films that I feel like was on cable a bunch when I was a little kid, and I think I tried to watch parts of it, but I was like, there was a disconnect because it's Harrison Ford, but he's not like shooting people or like stealing treasures or whatever. So I was kind of bored and I didn't know what to make of it. But now watching it as an adult, as a dad, as someone who finds himself almost in the same kind of like political climate as his character was in in this movie back in 1986. I feel like it resonates, and I don't know why this was not a bigger film. Maybe one of those reasons comes down to critical reception. We'll get into that and what the late great Roger Ebert thought of the movie, but I want to begin with your appreciation for the Mosquito Coast, which I understand runs quite deep based on some of our conversations. Share with us, David. Why does the Mosquito Coast resonate with you, other than the fact that it's a Harrison Ford movie and you are, in fact, a huge Harrison Ford fan, as we all are?
Yeah, I mean, I'll back what you just said and say yes, it was very good last week to see it in 35 millimeter in its crackly, worn, messy glory, which is how it should be. Not that I wouldn't want a crisp digital copy of it, on Blu-ray. Hint, hint, whoever's listening. But yeah, so I mean, Ford had me at Star Wars, Indiana Jones, Blade Runner, and as a kid growing up, I was what, 10 years old when Blade Runner came out. I was then watching everything. After that, it's Return of the Jedi. After that, it's Temple of Doom, and then 85 comes. Him and Peter Weir did Witness, and it was like, whoa, because then it's not just sci-fi and adventure. This is straight up serious stuff. Kind of a period piece because it takes place in modern day Amish country. Um, and I was captivated not just by Ford's performance, which earned his only Oscar nomination for Best Actor, but also the direction by Peter Weir. And even at that age, I realized that this was a good working relationship between actor and director, like really good. I mean, I thought him and Spielberg, him and Lucas were good, but this was something different, that we could see a different side of Ford. And to me, um, that's what I wanted. I wanted to see more of what he could do, and I think Witness definitely showed us that. But then even more so, Mosquito Coast. But if it wasn't for Witness, Mosquito Coast wouldn't have been made, because as I did some more research prior to this, and we'll talk about that later. But going back to your question, I mean, I saw this when I started high school, and that's when I started kind of like, yes, I was still like into all, mostly genre movies, but also, reading comics and everything. But I started like kind of branching out into, literature and stuff, and literary works. And I was always, back then in the 80s, there was always movie tie-in novels, right? So
Oh, yeah.
I even have the movie tie-in novel for a Witness. And it's like, there was one? Yes, there was one. There was one just for just about everything. Um, and so I realized that Ford's next movie, Mosquito Coast, wasn't just a movie tie-in. It was based on a novel by Paul Theroux. And I was like, whoa. And I remember taking this to my English teacher, and I'm like, hey, have you seen this? And he's like, oh, you know what? A college friend of mine wrote the screenplay for this. And I'm like, really? Yeah. He's like, yeah, Paul Schrader. He used to be a Calvin, college colleague or student, or I guess classmate of mine. And I'm like, whoa, and Yeah, and so it was like it got me like a lot more interested. I'm like, oh, really? Wow, okay. And so I read the book. It was for me, it was a dense read. It wasn't a tough read necessarily, but it was very immersive. It's told by the perspective of Charlie, um, who's played in this movie by River Phoenix. Um,
And
and yeah,
Charlie is Allie. His Allie is Harrison Ford's character. He's
yeah,
the patriarch of this family, and Charlie is his oldest teenage
yeah.
son.
So they have
Yeah.
the oldest son. He has two sons and two twin daughters, and his wife uh, is just goes by Mother, played by the great Helen Mirren. And so I guess when I first saw this, I was just like totally captivated. I knew that Ford could do other things because of Witness, but then I was just like, this is something different. Like this is a character that I can't look away from, but I'm also kind of repulsed by, but I'm also really engaged with, and I could see. I also connected big time with River Phoenix's portrayal as his devoted son, and even throughout this journey in the movie, Phoenix's Charlie is realizing that his father quite, quite literally might be mad, but he would always be quick to defend him because he loved him. My father's an inventor. Wherever he went, um, and you get the idea that Allie Fox has raised his family in kind of like this cocoon a bit, almost like a cult, where um, they do things on their own. They're apart from all the capitalism around them and fast food and all this stuff. And it's interesting, because there's just this awareness that the character arc in Charlie, he develops this awareness of like, oh, well, maybe my father's not that great of a guy. And I was coming into that realization too, because my parents had just gotten divorced. And I was realizing it's one of those things where you realize that your parents are humans and
Hmm.
they're actual people and they're flawed and they're not perfect. And not that I ever thought my parents were perfect, but when you're when you have a front row seat to the dissolve uh desolation of a marriage. um
Well, it's also, I think part of that is, and this is certainly true in my own life, you realize that you came along at a specific point in their lives.
right.
Like they had an entire existence before a
Hmm.
childhood, teenagership, courtship,
Right.
marriage, then kids, and then you enter the equation instead of like, oh, these are the people that made me, and everything kind of revolves around me, and
Hmm.
they're there to support me in some way, which is true in the best of circumstances, but they bring all this kind of baggage to the relationship before you even got there. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a big moment.
So I appreciated the and I connected with the father son dynamic. I love the whole, you know roughing it survival, will they make it kind of thing, that happens. Yeah, and so I guess it really meant a lot to me. And then after that, he makes Roman Polanski's Frantic, and then that same year, Mike Nichols' Working Girl in let's see, 87 Frantic, in 80
Working Girl is 88. Yeah.
88 Working
Mhm.
Girl, and let's see, yeah, I mean, and then Last Crusade, of course. But yeah, I mean, between the Indiana Jones movies, I mean, these movies are really significant with some great directors. But yeah, you could tell that this is something completely different.
And I wonder if part of that is people had come to know Harrison Ford as this big action star. And even Witness is more kind of action packed. I mean, it's, witness protection and, there's, kind
The
of
showdown at the
gangsterish
end, yeah.
violence. Yeah, that kind of thing. So it's an exciting picture. This more is more of a character and a family study. It's almost like like Apocalypse Now with
Mm.
survivalist family. I
Yeah.
mean, complete with
Swiss.
shots like going up the river, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Swiss
Um,
Family Apocalypse, right?
there you go. I just was reminded of, I think it was a 2015 movie with Viggo Mortensen, Captain Fantastic, where
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
had
Yeah.
this whole group and he kind of took them out in, in America, but that same kind of living off the grid, making their own clothes, anti-consumerism.
Right.
But I mean, I look at the Allie Fox and Mother Fox as there was something going on in the 80s because another movie that River Phoenix was in '87, I think, was Running on Empty,
Great movie.
where which I don't think I've seen
So
in
good.
its entirety in probably 30 years. But yeah, that was a situation where it was like Christine Lottie and Judd Hirsch were the parents, and I
Hmm.
think they were on the run because they were like radicals in the
I
'60s,
think they were
right?
part of the Weather. Was it Weather Underground, or is that? Yeah.
Possibly,
Yeah.
yeah, or an organization like
Yeah.
that.
Hmm.
So there's this idea of, what happened to the children of the 60s as they moved into the 80s. You had the one extreme of like Wall Street and, the big business kind of yuppie stuff, and then you had, the kind of the activist side of people like the kind of commune living that the Foxes had adopted for themselves, even though they weren't living with other families. There was very much like self-sufficient living, as much off the grid as they could. Allie would go into the local hardware store to buy parts that he needed and kind of give a very young Jason Alexander as the frustrated store clerk. That was kind of fun to see.
Hmm.
But yeah, but he's constantly railing against America, talking about like issues of, capitalism, consumerism, immigration. It's and the economy's terrible. Wouldn't it be, our founding fathers would be rolling over in their graves. We need to get back to that pioneering spirit that built the country. A lot of this kind of, almost a make America great again sentiment back in the 1980s that we see kind of replaying itself out now in some circles. So, but he actually takes his family to, what's known as the Mosquito Coast or the Mesquitia, I
Hmm.
think in probably Central America. They head out there on a boat. They just pack up a few things. They get on a boat. They travel there. They end up, quote unquote, buying a town, which turns out to be like a very small plot of land that's just off this, muddy riverbank.
Geronimo.
Right. And there are people living there that they kind of recruit to help them actually build a town. Because one of the things we find out in the opening narration, as you alluded to, is Allie is an inventor, but he's also a genius, um, sort of an unheralded by society genius who's a mechanical whiz. He remembers everything. I think he dropped out of Harvard, if I remember correctly, or one of those Ivy League schools. But yeah, he goes there to this town and he builds he builds a town out of nothing. He actually fabricates a large scale version of this ice making machine that he had tried to sell to some kind of a farmer in the beginning of the movie, and the guy
Hmm.
didn't want it. He's like, I don't care about this. And like, but you can freeze your asparagus and it'll last longer or whatever. He's like, I don't care. Get back to work.
Basically.
Um, right. So he goes out there, and there's a native population that he kind of recruits to help him build this town. And he brings ice to a country that had never really seen it before. And that they set up a barter system. It's all kind of beautiful and utopic until some pirates show up. Actually, no, I'm getting ahead of myself.
Probably mercenaries. Yeah. Yeah.
Mercenaries. Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
better term. But they find out that there is some kind of a native tribe that has been pretty much non-interfered with by civilization or the wider world, living deep in this jungle. They go to deliver them a ball of ice because he's really thrilled at being able to say, this is these people have probably hardly seen white people before. They've definitely never seen a snowball before. We're going to show this
Hmm.
to them and bring them culture. While they're visiting, and of course the ice melts by the time they get there, they realize there are three captives of this tribe, and Allie helps to free them to his own peril because they show up later as like, hey, it's a nice place you got here. Let's kind of set up
We're
camp.
staying here. Yeah.
Right. And what I love is that there's not a it's all just the physical threat of people with, guns and machetes showing up to your encampment, and it's just kind of all implied. you know, like you're going to give us this nice place to stay, and we're just going to set up camp and all this other stuff. And Allie and his family are freaking out. They're like, "Oh yeah, you don't even want to stay there. We're not going to stay here because there's an infestation, and we got to burn all of these. You know, we got to burn all this thing down because it's unlivable.
Yeah,
This
ants,
beautiful
termites.
paradise."
Yeah,
Right, but this beautiful paradise that they've just built, they've got like ceiling fans going, you know, that they've it's really quite a feat. But then it's threatened, and I won't go too far beyond this because I don't want to spoil this for people who've not seen it any more than I already have. But a number of complications begin to arise, and they compound throughout the rest of the film. And watching the family kind of come apart, watching Allie and his mental stability kind of unravel, and this idea of this is the patriarch, this is the guy who's leading the family, everyone's kind of in lockstep, even if reluctantly, seeing that dynamic start to shift. Again, I'm watching this, it feels very much like a novel unfolding on screen, and I loved it. And I was just wondering, why don't people talk about this movie? Why isn't it remembered, uh, like, I think, sort of the masterpiece that it is?
I don't get it. I mean, I have a friend who he and I both love Harrison Ford and Harrison Ford movies, and he's like, "Oh, Mosquito Coast." I just don't understand it. I mean, because like he's totally disappearing into the role. Like, the studios didn't know what to do with this movie. Like the producer, Jerome Hellman, when the novel came out in '82, I guess he optioned the rights, and he got the rights for it, and started kind of feeling around for what studio would be interested, but everybody was like, there's no sympathetic character. This, what's going on here? This isn't marketable. It's uncommercial. And he got Peter Weir involved, and Peter Weir was definitely interested. But it wasn't until the success of Witness, Peter Weir and Harrison Ford, and that combo, that other studios were like, "Oh, okay, well maybe now we're interested because these two can make a good movie." It's like, so, and then Paul Schrader was tapped and everything, but yeah, the studios didn't know what they had, and it's pretty crazy. One of the things that when Weir met with, I'm reading out of this the book on Harrison Ford films that I have. When Weir met with Theroux, the writer of Mosquito Coast, Theroux offered his own insights into the character of Allie Fox. He said, "I think the key to Allie is showing all sides of his personality, and at times showing how one personality lies just beneath the other. Loud bullying being a feature of a rather inward shyness, bravery being a wilder manifestation of blind cowardice, and most inventiveness being self-serving." I mean, that's a fascinating character to me right there.
It is, and, when I first saw what Harrison Ford was doing in this movie, I kinda got the cringe chills because he's, wearing glasses, he's kind of got that, he was just doing a character unlike anything I'd seen him do before, and I had this weird flashback to what Jamie Foxx did in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, where he was playing the nerd character before he became Electro. I'm like, "You're an Oscar-winning serious actor, and you're playing a nerd." I just felt like Harrison Ford was reading the script, like, on the set of, I don't know, not Blade Runner or something, or maybe like, uh, Temple of Doom or something. Someone sent him as like, "Oh, I could really do something with this. I'll give him kinda mussed up hair and glasses, and I'll have him be like a real kinda like a right-wing nut job or something. I'm gonna really get into this character."
Well,
And
yeah,
but
yeah,
that's the first, like, couple of minutes. That's the
mhm,
first scene in the hardware store, really.
sure, sure,
But then I realized that there's more dimension to him, and he's playing him almost as a sympathetic, like, as if Harrison Ford believed in this character's point of view and was really going places with it. And so very quickly I came to respect and fall in love with the performance. Not to say I agreed with his point of view, but I believe that he believed in that character's point of view.
right. And I guess even when these movies came out, and by these movies I mean like Witness and Mosquito Coast back to back like this, me knowing a lot of behind the scenes, or knowing a lot about Ford off screen, meaning um, primarily a carpenter, you know, and literally fell into the role of Han Solo just kind of, you know, kind of accidentally. I mean, he was working on a door, you know, and they're like, well, why don't you read for this? You know, so these movies, when he's playing John Book and Witness and Allie Fox and Mosquito Coast, even when I first saw them, I felt like, wow, this must be closer to who Ford is. And so, you know, yeah, when I did see him as, you know, John Book, he's helping the Amish, you know, raise a barn. He's doing his carpentry skills here, doing the same thing here too, building a village. And I just felt like, you know, this must be how, you know, he would be in his element, you know, building something, creating something, being obsessed about, you know, planning things out and building something, you know, as a carpenter, you know, but then with the obsessiveness and arrogance of Allie Fox, a very complex character, it just becomes even a more attractive character, and I guess attractive more so. I guess more mesmerizing than attractive. Obviously, there's definitely some unattractive qualities or characteristics about Allie, but again, you just kind of can't look away, and it's not because it's played by Harrison Ford, although I, you know, maybe outside of say Jeff Bridges at the time, I couldn't see maybe anybody else playing him. But you know, I think it's mostly because of the just the complexities of the role and what Ford brings to it.
Yeah. And I also kind of resonate with some of the stuff he was talking about because he is an inventor and he likes to make all of his own stuff. He talks about the disposability of modernity, like, you know, your coffee pot breaks, you just buy a new one because they're so cheap now instead of
Hmm.
fixing it.
Yeah.
And I think about a lot of that stuff, you know, today, you know. Yeah,
Right.
everything is there's a brand new iPhone that comes out every single year, and it's like people will stand in line to buy the new one. It's like you have a perfectly good phone that would probably last you half a decade or more. Spent $1,000 on it, but no, you gotta, you know, trade up to the new one because it's got a better camera or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah. Or sadly, you know, something in your home needs a filter. I could have sworn I bought that filter at some point and it's stored away somewhere, but I'll just really quickly buy it again on Amazon and it'll get here in by 7 p.m. You know,
Right.
it's just
Yeah, you're gonna have someone at a warehouse go get a filter and then have it put on a truck to drive to your house so it can get there immediately instead of just like looking in the third closet or,
right.
you know, driving
Later,
yourself to Target or something like that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Later on you'll find it stowed away in a closet. Oh, I remember putting it here so I wouldn't forget. Oh, yeah, well, that's how that goes.
But, you know, it is a fascinating performance, but aside from that, it's rare that a modern well, I'd say in my modern movie going experiences, not necessarily the modern movie because this film is pretty old, um, that I'm wowed. There is an explosion and a lead up to an explosion in this film that comes almost at the middle of the movie. And I was talking to you as I was leaving, I need to see this film again because after this giant set piece, the film keeps going on and it's still very good, but
There
it's
you go.
almost like
Oh.
yeah. But
We do that thing where you grab it across and it's like,
yeah,
yeah.
I wish I had that copy
Mm.
on DVD. But coming back from that set piece, like it's a big punctuation point, and it's kind of hard to rival anything narratively after that happens. But I was just in awe of what Weir did. I don't know if that was accomplished through model work, fancy camera work. I mean, it all looked very practical and very convincing. And it's one of those things where an explosion happens, but then the after effects of that explosion, which leads to like more fires and explosions happens, the devastation, the peril that the characters are in physically and psychologically. Again, that was when it first popped into my head. I'm like, why isn't this a bigger movie?
I just think at the time they just, you know, audiences didn't know how to react to it, and studios, you know, even critics were just like, I don't know about this, and we'll get to that later. But yeah, that scene is pretty remarkable, especially the fact that I mean they built a set, this set in Belize, and I think I was reading somewhere where it said that at the time, let me see here, but yeah, Belize it made like The $7 million which the producers invested in the local economy made the film company the third biggest industry that year in Belize, following sugar and marijuana.
Wow.
Over 300 citizens were hired to build roads, carry supplies, and transport the all-important dailies. Yeah, I mean that whole scene and some of the from either the aerial shots or the shots from the river looking at the village Geronimo, with along with the soundtrack by Maurice Jarre. I mean, it's just it almost feels otherworldly, in a way sometimes. And then for it to all be destroyed like that, how easy it is to destroy something that took forever to create. And the fact that, well, who destroyed it? The creator destroyed it. Because he wouldn't let these three mercenaries, do this to them.
Well, and rightfully so, because we kind of see, at least as the audience, and it's kind of implied that Allie and Charlie for sure saw the way that they were eyeing Mother and kind of like crowding in on her when they thought that they were alone with her, and Allie would burst in like, "Hey guys, we got your beds ready,
Right,
over
right.
there," kind of a thing.
And they're like, "What guest room?"
Yeah, but he was right to do what he had to do. I just don't think he thought it would get out of hand. But that speaks to the hubris of the character that we see from the beginning of the film all the way through the end, kind of crumbling down around him. And I think there's, for lack of a better term, sort of an anti-colonial message, because he's like, yeah, we're going to take our technology to this place that has been sort of it's been undiscovered, except for the people who currently live there, and we're going to make things better. But they don't take any pains to defend themselves. They don't bring or make any weapons. They don't use any of the locals as security,
Right.
or even have those kinds of conversations. They just think that, hey, we're building this great thing. Going back to that hippie idea, we can just have this barter system, this commune. It's all peace and love, and everyone's going to be friends.
Right.
That's not the case at
No.
all.
And speaking of where they're living and everything, we haven't touched on their neighbors up the river. The Spellgood family, led by Reverend Spellgood, a kind of exuberantly energetic evangelical pastor, played by Andre Gregory, great Andre Gregory.
Of My Dinner with Andre fame. Yes,
I know.
that is Andre.
Exactly. Yeah. And his he has a wife and who doesn't really have too many lines, but then his daughter is also pretty prevalent in the movie, played by Martha Plimpton, and she has just a great part. Emily Spellgood is her name, and we meet them when they're all on the boat together on their way to Mesquite, and even the captain, he's getting to know his crew. They're having dinner, and the captain asks the Foxes, "Well, what are you doing down there? What's going on?" And he's like, "Well, we're moving there." And he's like, "What?" He's like, the look that the captain gives them is like, "Huh?" And so even like there is this kind of undercurrent of the way, religion factors into how religion is used in certain ways, and what Allie's thoughts and takes are. He's a very literate man and he knows his Bible, but he doesn't believe in it.
Right.
And which is kind of just something that Reverend Spellgood is unprepared for. And it was I loved their back and forth.
I did too, and I think Spellgood as a character, the Reverend. We'll get to Emily in a second, but what was refreshing to me is it's very rare that we see, and I've only watched the movie once, so maybe I missed something. But usually when we see an ultra religious character, especially someone who's like a missionary type, there's an underlying degree of hypocrisy that will come out as sort of like nefarious intent, like, oh, I'm going to go bring Jesus to the locals and maybe I'll get some local tail while I'm at it or something like that. A sinister kind of like using religion for nefarious purposes. I think that Reverend Spellgood was a true believer, unsure, as you mentioned, what to do with someone like Allie Fox, who's kind of trying to undercut him at every turn, because Allie, I think, believes that the Reverend on some level is up to no good. Like, who are you to bring, the word of God to these people? They're fine on their own. Um, Even later in the film, when it's sort of meant as like part laugh line, part eerie, like what's going on here, where they discover that in the absence of the spell goods, this village that they've set up, this kind of religious, village, there are people in a church watching televisions of him kind of giving a sermon, and it's all
Yeah,
very, very produced
recordings.
and very
Yeah.
showy, right? You're like, oh, is he a crook? Is there something going on? And it turns out, at least from my perspective, no, that's just so that they can continue to have services while the Spellgood family is like off either doing more missionary work or getting supplies, because they come back from a trip
Hmm.
essentially.
And it could
Um,
have been the store, it could have been another location, whatever.
right, but I never got this feeling like he was trying to swindle these folks. So but he is sort of portrayed as one of the antagonists in the movie, mostly because he's constantly butting up against Allie Fox. So
Right.
that's a dimension and a character type that I don't really see in movies. And again, I'm like, I want to see more of this nuance in movies.
Right. Right. I mean, that was really interesting too, because I think we're kind of trained to be suspicious of, such an evangelical, you know, and like, oh, well, where's the hypocrisy coming, like you said? And no, I mean, these are just missionaries, and, you know, growing up knowing of missionaries, I didn't see them as, you know, weird or I said, oh well, this is going to be a cheesy portrayal or whatever, because I was used to seeing that in pop culture or whatever. But I just kind of got a kick out of how persistent and true that he was to his character. I mean, when the Fox family are kind of out, kind of reading on the deck, and they got their sunscreen on their nose and everything, they're all chilling out, and Reverend Spellgood comes out, and he's like, hello, and he's kind of like the Ned Flanders a little bit,
Yeah.
but but he gives them latest edition of their Bible. It's called the Blue Jean Bible, and it's got like a blue jean like pocket in the front and everything. Is just, it's cheesy, but there's a sincerity there, um and there's some great lines, and like, of course, Emily is Charlie's age, and so it, you get the idea that he probably hasn't seen a whole lot of other um kids his age, let alone girls, because you you kind of also get the idea that these kids are probably all homeschooled.
Oh,
um
definitely. Yeah.
yeah, and so not a lot of exposure to others. And this is probably something totally different for Emily too, because she probably, all these trips, these mission trips down to Musketia, from, I think, where they're coming from is like somewhere around Delaware or something. um she doesn't see people her age, and so of course, but she's also a lot more modern. She's got her Walkman, she's got her headphones, and and she's got the she's trying to conjure up a conversation with Charlie, and she's like, what bands do you listen to? What music do and then he goes and talks to her about, my father's an inventor, and her response to it is just kind of like, oh, okay, dude, geez, and then, when she's done, she kind of walks away and says the classic line, I think of you when I go to the bathroom. And it's like, what do you do with that? It's like, it's so funny. um yeah.
It is strange, and River Phoenix, I think, does. It's kind of a small, it's an understated part, but I loved his interaction with, Martha Plimpton in that their first kind of encounter on the boat,
Hmm.
because he's kind of aloof, he's not really looking at her, and he's kinda giving these, like, short clipped answers, except when he talks about how great his dad is, it's almost that it's not a religious kind of homeschool program that we're talking about, but you could almost see the religion of anti-modernity.
Yeah.
And like, if you talk to modern teenagers, all they're going to care about is like music and material things and the latest Walkman and all this stuff. So he probably sees her as like an alien. Like, look, I'm not going to like you. You're not going to like me. Leave me alone. I'm going off to do this thing. We're not going to date. Even though she says at one point, like, she's like, you want to be my boyfriend or
Yeah.
yeah.
I could be your
So
girlfriend, you know.
right. It's all very innocent and fun, but you can just see without having to go into a big like speech or blow up or anything, you kind of fill in the blanks of what might be going on in both of these characters' heads. And I love that.
Hmm.
I want to jump
Yeah.
real quick to the critical response because you had sent me a link to Roger Ebert's 2-star review,
Yeah.
which you can read on rogerebert.com, and which I'm going to read a segment of it here and also link it in the
Hmm.
notes. But it's funny because I'm going to read his opening paragraph and his closing paragraph.
Okay, go ahead.
Some kinds of bores you will tolerate, and other kinds you will not. The Mosquito Coast has the misfortune to be about the second kind of bore, about a man who is zealous in the pursuit of his obsessions long after they have ceased to interest anyone else. And he closes it by saying, let's see. He fell in love with a young woman whose father was rigid and uncompromising, so utterly sure of his own infallibility that he was heedless of the unhappiness he caused others. The Mosquito Coast, unfortunately, is all about that kind of father. Okay.
Now,
He's
before,
well, okay, sorry, go ahead.
well, I was going to say, to counter that, I'd like to read just a quick blurb from Siskel.
Oh, okay, the classic Siskel and
Yeah,
Ebert
yeah, yeah.
duality.
So here we are. I found myself on the inside with him because in the beginning, I didn't think he was nuttier than a fruitcake. The guy seriously thinks there are problems in the land and wants to do something about it. It reminded me of the 60s notion of making it a better world. This movie is quite compelling in showing the descent into madness out of good intentions. This movie is about how noble wishes and noble desires can be misled.
There you go. I think that's very astute from Mr. Siskel, and I think that captures a lot of my own kind of feelings about it in his eloquent way. But my criticism of Roger Ebert, and I kind of shared this with you after you shared the review with me, his criticism of Allie Fox and the movie overall about this unsympathetic kind of a jerk character who's totally tunnel visioned in his pursuit of this crazy idea to the near destruction of his family. Roger Ebert loves Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I hate that movie. I'll
Mhm.
go on record and saying I hate Close Encounters. It is a technical marvel. It was ahead of its time, as were most Steven Spielberg productions. But uh, the Roy Neary character, um, at the end, he decides that yeah, his family is completely wrecked. He doesn't really care about them anymore. He just wants to go up in space with the space aliens.
Mm.
And to me, that's totally unforgivable, but it's heralded as a classic in many ways, rightfully so. But you can have, on one hand, a dad who abandons his family for space aliens. On the other hand, a dad who tries to bring his family along to build utopia, but it all goes horribly wrong. One is a masterpiece, and the other is a bore and a slog full of unlikable, central characters.
Yeah, I mean they're both very they're both characters are very interesting to compare, and somewhat unfairly to compare. But the similarities are probably stronger than their differences. Um, they're both obsessed by something, but I think I think that there's more. Allie has more to be obsessed about, where Roy Neary is obsessed with the unknown. Allie knows things, and he knows that things can be better, and he just believes it. And he has this kind of indomitable will. A lot of times, to the detriment of those around him. Most of the time, because even when the big fat boy creation explodes and destroys the village, what you could see internally, he's horrified and he's
Hmm.
guilt ridden and he's destroyed. But can he share that with his family? No way. He's like, okay, well, this is good. We'll rebuild. I'm happy. And it's like, who, and the family, maybe not the twin girls, but definitely the older boy, Charlie, and his wife, Helen Mirren's character, they know. They know what's going. I mean, this is like, who's he trying to kid?
And
So
also Jerry, the younger
yeah,
brother, played by Jadrian Steele,
hmm
he goes completely against his dad. Later in the picture,
right.
becomes very antagonistic. So yeah, the things are falling apart at the seams by that point. Um, but and yeah, there's been a criticism of Helen Mirren's mother character as not having a lot of agency.
hmm
Ebert spends a good portion of his review saying, "What does she think about all this?" And is she okay? She has like one outburst, but that's kind of all we get of the character. I think that's an all right criticism. I don't know if the book goes more into her perspective, or whatever,
It's
but
been a while since I read it, so I couldn't really say.
right,
Yeah.
but maybe that's just not something that the story is interested in, and some people might have a problem with that. Some movies are just about obsessive men destroying their lives, and I'm okay with that too. But I would also look at Paul Schrader's Taxi Driver that he wrote, that Martin Scorsese, directed. That is also about a guy who becomes obsessed, who
hmm
hates what he perceives America to have become, and he wants to do something about it, and he spends the entire movie building, in this case it's like his body and his arsenal,
Yeah.
to go and take down the system.
Right.
And that's another film that's heralded by everybody.
And
um,
Ebert. Yeah.
right. And but Travis Bickle is also on many levels that, he's somewhat sympathetic and that you understand his plight, but he's also despicable because he's, flat out crazy.
hmm
So my personal beef with Roy Neary, who I think is, portrayed brilliantly by Richard Dreyfuss. It's a great performance. I just didn't like the character. Is that I don't care how important this discovery is to mankind. If the aliens come down and they ask, maybe they never had this conversation because his family's broken by then, but it's like, yeah, I'll go off to your planet if my family can come with me. If they're
hmm
like, no, there's only room for one, I'm like, well, that's going to be someone else. I, I know that you exist now. The mashed potato mountain, it makes sense to me and to the world at this point, but you go have fun. I'll be down here.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I again, I don't understand it. I think sometimes I know that even when this movie came out, some people thought that Ford's acting was too big, overacting, and I'm like, gosh, no way. I don't see that at all. I mean, I think that there's a lot of nuances to his performance. I mean, when we see him back at the asparagus farm in the beginning of the movie, and he's dejected by his boss when he brings him this model of Fat Boy and shows him, how a glass, a drinking glass, is frozen by just lighting, this, little model, um, and the dejection on his face, and he goes from dejected to, just kind of feigning a resolve, just like, all right, well, I'd be upset if he liked it, and it's just, you could see how his sons just really couldn't understand how to follow him. Like, okay, well, my father worked on this forever. His boss didn't like it, and now my dad is okay with that, and we're just gonna move on. It's like, see, you could tell that, you know Charlie, the oldest son, is just realizing, okay, something's not right here.
Is and it's an awkward manifestation of, I think, a great life lesson, in that you should not seek your self-worth, your valid self-validation should not be in the hands of other people. You know, if Allie were seen as a more stable, conventional character or person, then I think that scene would have been played more as a heroic moment rather than a like, okay, he's just BSing to save face in front of his family or whatever. But it's like,
Yeah.
okay, you don't want my invention, that's fine. Someone else will want it, or I'll go find a use for it. You know, your opinion is not the end all be all of my life. You're not going to crush me. Um,
And that's where he's this insecurity is masked. This sensitivity, this insecurity is masked by just this uh kind of like coldness, the thick skinned coldness that's like, okay, well, I'm not gonna let that bother me, but it does bother him,
it
and yeah,
It does, but he turns that into something else, something productive. Now, it might be a completely insane productive thing, but it's also a good lesson. You know, that the Chumbawamba song, you get knocked down, you get back up again.
no, for sure,
um,
for sure.
and it's, you know, it's a very sad ending to the
Hmm.
movie in one sense, because again, I don't want to spoil it, but there is a freedom that is gained by the tragedy that happens at the end of the movie, and it's what are these characters going to do with that freedom? You know, they could follow the Allie Fox path. They could all go back to America, and just become like good little consumers, or maybe find a blend of both. Because
Hmm.
for as much as the country has problems, there is the freedom in a lot of ways to do whatever you want. I mean, you
Right,
can buy a plot of land in the middle of Kansas and have your own commune and
right.
build stuff out there and never buy a Coca-Cola again.
Yeah. And he does have this. You mentioned Apocalypse Now. I mean, he does have this downward spiral character arc. Ford's Fox does, and it very much becomes this possessed, kind of, narrow-minded, not necessarily narcissism, but just this, uh, kind of the tunnel vision, um, self-obsessed kind of, um, just terrible presence in his family, and it's just, even when the movie goes in the third act. I mean, yes, their village is destroyed and they have to go, set off on a raft down the river. Um, there, it's I found it interesting how, this other character who we haven't mentioned, Mr. Hattie, played by
I was just
Conrad
gonna,
Conrad Roberts.
yeah,
Great character, fantastic. And I love it. In any other movie, this character would just be comedy relief.
right.
And I think that it's very sad that, like, Mother Helen Mirren's character sees Mr. Hattie as, you know a man who is inviting them in and offering kindness, but Fox sees that kindness as kind of like intervening on his plan, and almost, usurping his role, trying to get one over on him in a way, like, I'm not going to take, we're fine here, I'm not going to take your help, and it's detrimental. It's detrimental.
Right, and getting back to that sort of like almost a colonial idea, the popular conception of colonization, like there are a few times, particularly towards the middle of the movie and then towards the end, where Mr. Hattie offers his help to the family. Like, you know, if you just want to, because yeah, you mentioned after the fat boy blows up, there's this idea of staying on this beach, and it's not only hazardous, but it's dumb because Mr. Hattie's like, look, my home, my village is just, you know, it's just up that way. You guys can come. We can, you know, maybe you can build a life there. There's a great community, but Allie Fox is so determined to put his stamp, to build his society for his family and be the benefactor to the other people so that he can get that recognition that he so craves, that he doesn't understand the tremendous opportunity for collaboration. You know, what if he were to bring his inventions to a society that's already up and running that could possibly use a boost rather than trying to build something from scratch in an area that doesn't really have a scratch to begin with because there's already people there?
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just sad, and Hattie's a great character, and even like the two boys, Charlie and Jerry were like Mr. Hattie, whenever he showed up, there was a connection, and you get the idea that, like, maybe Allie had this, jealousy because Mr. Hattie offered them, kindness, patience, a giving heart, Probably something they're not necessarily used to being given by their father. In fact, um, one obviously telling scene of, parent-child, father-son interaction is when they were lugging that ice up the hill to the natives in that kind of really remote location, and the younger son Jerry has just had it. It's raining. They're mostly going uphill the whole time, and the poor kid is just sitting there, and he's like, I want to go home, and where are we going to go now? And all he gets from his father is antagonism and sarcasm.
Hmm.
There's no tender, and the way Ford plays this is so good too, because even when he pushes them away with this tone, you could see in him a silent reaction of like, I've gone too far with that, but there's no taking it back. It's out there, and it's just, he's destroying his family and himself, even just in conversations. It's sad. um yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird because I'm going back to the theme of this, this movie being part of a series called Daddy Issues, and it's almost like flippant. I don't know. I don't want to, cast aspersions on whoever programmed this, but it seems almost like this notion of you have this kind of a cute title of movies called Daddy Issues, and some very serious films dealing with serious issues, but you kind of give the series this cute title, and you're showing a movie that's a famous like bomb from 1986 that nobody talks about. There's almost like the sense of like, hey, come see this movie and maybe have a good laugh. If it got people into the theater to watch this and they came, because I didn't hear any laughter or derision. I did hear one person snoring very loudly, which was very interesting.
Yeah.
um but I feel like by whatever means necessary to get people to watch The Mosquito Coast and maybe talk about it afterwards, like, I've never even heard of this movie before. I heard it was terrible. It's actually pretty good. I think is, however it got there, I think it's worth it.
Yeah, I mean, I've said this after the movie. This is Ford has gone on record saying this is his favorite role that he's had, and it's what does he say? He said it's the only film I have done that hasn't made its money back. I'm still glad I did it. If there was a fault with the film, it was that it didn't fully enough embrace the language of the book by Paul Theroux. It may have more properly been a literary rather than a cinematic exercise, but I still think it's full of powerful emotions. And
Very well said.
something else that Ford did when this movie came out, and in the response to all the bad criticism by audiences or film critics, something I've never seen him do before. Um, he it says here in this book, the normally low-key Harrison Ford was disheartened by the treatment of this movie in the press. He wrote a letter to the Philadelphia Inquirer in which he complained, I have never seen a serious film treated so badly by the critics, and I think they're wrong. The picture is well worth seeing. It's a very complicated and ambitious piece, and I would like people to see it. I would like to do whatever I can to help that happen. And what I love about that is that, nowadays when Dwayne Johnson bombs a film, he says, "Well, it was for fans." Well, it was, well, it wasn't for, it's there's a lot of backpedaling or whatever, and I guess I really appreciate, again, I haven't seen Ford do this for any other films. I mean, he's not out defending Firewall or 6 days or 7 nights or something like that, but this meant, you could tell this meant a lot to him because he did that. And I like how he's saying this picture is well worth seeing, not like my performance or I did my darndest, or whatever.
Right.
He believed in he what the movie is as a whole, and what the story was.
And he didn't need to do that. I mean, it's
No.
not like he's talking about Indiana Jones, you know, 3 or whatever, where
Hmm.
it's like there's a huge studio backing behind this and it's
Hmm.
very important to get, butts and seats. This is, yeah, it's a smaller picture, and I'm sure they could have used all the butts and seats that they could get, but yeah, he's not defending a franchise, he's defending something that felt very personal to him, at least watching the movie and And in our discussion about it and what you're reading from that book, I can tell that that's the case. Yeah, it's nice to see people stand up for their art. I will say that it's funny. That's an older book you're reading from, but
Yeah.
I think he's going to have at least a second movie that's going to lose money that may or may not be out in theaters right now. But for anybody for those who loved Dial of Destiny, Indiana Jones 5, great. If you didn't like Indiana Jones 5, and maybe you're looking for a slice of Harrison Ford's performance that really shows what he can do as an actor that isn't just recapturing the old Indiana Jones glory, check out Mosquito Coast. You might have to shell out a pretty penny for an out-of-print DVD, or maybe you can find it streaming somewhere, or find a revival house and see if they have it. But yeah, check it out because this is a powerful performance. It's unlike any Ford performance you've ever seen or will see at this point in his career. But yeah, it's really a terrific film, and I thank you, David, for recommending that we go see it. You've talked about this in passing over the years. I'm like, what is this with the Mosquito Coast? Didn't that movie suck? Like, no, it didn't. It's just people think that it is because they never bothered to watch it.
True, very true. I was glad that we got a chance to see it in the theater, but I was thrilled that of your response after we left the theater. I was like, oh, I'm so glad we could still be friends. And because it's just, I don't know how people can't at least respect the film and be impressed by it, but let alone really dig it. And it's something to really dig into.
Yeah, very much so. All right, sir. Well, I think we've dug as much as we can into Mosquito Coast. Maybe there's more, but I actually want to read the novel now. I'll have to put that on my reading list. But yeah, so thank you, David Fowley. Where can people find you? What are you up to these days?
Oh, just we're down here keeping it real. I'm still writing reviews, and if you're local, a couple Mondays a month, I'll be at the Tivoli Theater discussing movies in Downers Grove.
Do you know what the next one coming up is?
Good question. Put me on a spot. I think it's called Other People's Children, and that'll be in a couple weeks. Good movie.
Okay. Where can people go to find out about like tickets and showtimes and all that?
I
good
would
stuff?
say go to the Tivoli Theater in Downers Grove or Classic Cinemas Tivoli. Google that. And or After Hours Film Society. Downers Grove. Google that.
Okay. Yeah. Film screening and then film discussion with you, David Fowley. Not to be clear, not a Q&A, but an actual film discussion.
Right,
So
right.
I was able to attend one of those. It was like a year or two ago now for, oh my God, for Relative, wasn't it?
Right.
Yeah, that was a hell of a night.
That was
So
fun.
yeah, check it out. But yeah, thank you, sir. We'll be talking about more stuff, possibly even another Harrison Ford performance this week.
Yeah.
If we can make the stars align. So I appreciate it, man. Thank you. And thank you out there. If you made it this far, thank you. If you like the content, please subscribe and like and all that good stuff. Support David. All his information is down below. Until next time, whenever that is, whatever that is, thanks very much and take care.
And as Allie Fox would say, goodbye and have a nice day.
Oh, wait. Epilogue. You told me before the screening started, this may be the most Harrison Ford pointing at people movie ever. And I think you're right. I think I lost count at like 47.
Yeah, it was awesome. I was like gleeful every time he pointed. Like, yes. So, yeah.
There you go.
That's the point.
Yeah. Oh, no.